G'day ladies and gents, and welcome back to War Thunder with Mags, and today we're going to be taking a look at one of the newest vehicles to ground forces. This is the... God damn it, Germany. This is the Puma. So, the Puma is a rank 1 battle rating 2.7 armoured reconnaissance vehicle of Germany. Rather than being tracked, it features 8 wheels, including 8-wheel steering. It's armed with a 50mm KWK 39/1 cannon with maximum of 55 shells, and a 7.92mm MG42 machine gun with 2,850 rounds in total. Fully upgraded, 13.2 degrees per second turret rotation speed with 10 degrees of gun depression and 20 degrees of gun elevation, and the 50mm reloads in 3.9 seconds when fully upgraded with a reasonably experienced crew. So overall, the offensive power of the Puma is actually quite excellent for 2.7 battle rating. However, its weakness is in the armour. The front of the hull at its thickest point is only 30mm, with the front upper glacis being made of 3 panels, the lower and upper panel being 30mm thick, and the highly angled centre panel only being 15mm. It carries at maximum 8mm of armour to the sides and 10 to the rear on the hull. The turret is 30mm to the front as well, with 14 to the sides and rear. So overall, the tank isn't particularly heavily armoured. This is not a vehicle that you want to take into frontline combat. In fact, most vehicles will be able to punch through the armour quite easily. However, it does have some advantages. The tank itself has a very tall profile, something that would normally be considered a negative. But the turret itself is a relatively small target in comparison to the size of the vehicle, and is in a position where doing what you see me doing on the screen right now, getting behind a ridgeline and just peeking over the top, is actually quite easy without revealing too much of the tank. Going hull down and engaging from range with this 50mm is actually a very, very good idea, and I found it the most effective way to play the vehicle. Thankfully, it's also reasonably fast and mobile, although it does have one major drawback, which is probably the single biggest drawback of the vehicle. The Puma only weighs 11.7 tons and has a 110 horsepower engine, so it actually gets up and goes at a fairly decent rate. Its theoretical max speed is 90 kilometers an hour. You won't hit it unless you throw it over a cliff, as far as I've been able to tell. That being said, you will be able to hit 40 kilometers an hour on rough terrain without too much of a problem whatsoever. Now, being a wheeled vehicle, it obviously does not have neutral steering. However, with the 4-wheel steering on the vehicle, it is able to turn at extremely high rate with a very small turning circle. This means circling around vehicles is very easy, and it's actually surprisingly good inside of a town, able to use its speed and rapidly shoot around corners without much of a delay, the kind of delay that you would tend to find on tracked vehicles. So all good so far, but then we come to the Puma's biggest weakness: inclination. This is something you normally don't hear people talk about, as most of the vehicles in War Thunder are pretty fine with this, but the Puma doesn't have a lot of traction due to the fact that it is a wheeled vehicle, and it can only climb a slope at a maximum inclination of 13 degrees. Why would this matter? There are some maps, particularly the Alpine hilly maps, that have slopes that are beyond that 13 degree threshold. The Puma, fully upgraded, is incapable of climbing these slopes. It'll get part way up and then it will just run out of speed and stop. The most glaring of these is on Frozen Pass. The Frozen Pass map has 3 potential capture zones in it. One of them is in the Tunnel of Death, the train tunnel on the southwest corner of the map. Now, that tunnel is on an elevated position, and I've played around with this in custom battles, and as far as I've been able to find, there is only one point on that elevated position leading up to that tunnel, which you can actually drive the Puma up and get to the tunnel, and it requires you to drive at almost a 45 degrees parallel to the edge of the mountain that you're climbing, in an area that is completely exposed with no cover, and you will at best be maintaining about 5 to 6 kilometers per hour while doing it, fully upgraded. Now, why would this matter? Just don't go to that hill. There is a version of that map where the only capture point on the entire map is inside of that train tunnel. If you happen to roll the Puma out and get that map, you are in a lot of trouble because you cannot challenge, defend, or attack that cap zone. Now, Frozen Pass is the most glaring example of this particular issue, but pretty much any map with any form of hill that is significant is going to cause the Puma a lot of problems. While it still will be able to move around the map on most of these, there will be passes and paths that it simply will not be able to go through, as it simply just won't have the steam to drive over the hills. So this is probably the biggest weakness of the Puma, but that being said, I actually really enjoy the vehicle. It is a fantastic little sniper able to move around, and as you're seeing here, I'm able to cause the enemy team a hell of a lot of problems and do a fairly reasonable job of clearing out around C position while making myself incredibly hard to attack. At this point, only the barrel of my gun and the very top section of my turret is actually visible, which is an incredibly small area to hit over this ridgeline. The vehicle itself is easily able to back itself up, its reverse speed is excellent, and transfer to a new position to continue doing the same thing, constantly popping up and harassing enemy forces. Just like that. Now the ammunition selection on the Puma is actually rather interesting as well. The primary shell you see me using here is the PZGR-39 armor-piercing capped shell. This is a 2.1 kilogram shell with an 835 meter a second muzzle velocity, so it's quite a fast moving projectile, very accurate over range, with 45.9 grams of TNT equivalent on board. It's also the only explosive core armor-piercing shell that the Puma gets access to. Its penetration values for its battle rating are not bad. It's 97mm at 10 meters, 96mm at 100 meters, and 79mm at 500mm. So for the most part, unless you run into something particularly heavy, you should be able to penetrate anything that you hit without too much of a problem. Now when you do run into those higher armoured vehicles and you cannot get through with your default rounds, the Puma comes with two variants of APCR. The first is the PZGR-40/1. It's a 1.1 kilogram APCR shell with a 1,140 meter a second velocity, so very accurate over range. At 10 meters it'll penetrate 128 millimeters of armor, 126 at 100 meters, and still manage to punch through 91 millimeters of armor at 500 meters. The second is the PZGR-40. The PZGR-40 is a 0.93 kilogram shell, so it's a little bit lighter, 1,180 meters per second in muzzle velocity. It'll penetrate through 150 millimeters of armor at 10 meters, 149 millimeters at 100 meters, and 108 millimeters at 500 meters. And last of all, there is of course the standard HE shell. This is the SPRGR-38. It's a 1.8 kilogram shell, 550 meters per second on velocity, so it's a much slower shell, but has a TNT equivalent of 170 grams. It'll only punch through 4 millimeters of armor, but with only a 50 millimeter gun, you're not going to be engaging armored targets. I basically carry 5 shells of this on board. On the off chance that I happen to encounter a self-propelled anti-aircraft gun, that my standard shell is just over penny. Although I can probably drop that down to 2 shells on my load up. I also carry 3 shells of the APCR on the off chance that I run into something heavy on a maximum up tier, but at this point, I've never really had a problem with it. The standard shells will go in providing you know where the weak spots are. Now of course the last thing to mention, this is a recon vehicle, so of course it does have access to artillery, and it's very, very useful to use it. My biggest gripe with the entire thing is you can clearly see mounted on the right and left hand sides of the turret, the Puma has smoke launchers, but currently it does not have access to the upgrade to actually use them, and this is the kind of vehicle where the ability to pop smoke would actually be incredibly useful. So at this point I have cleared off or driven out the enemy team as much as I can on this side of the map, although there is one guy camping the ridgeline over there. He's put one through the turret and got one of my crew, and yep, he does it again, but I get a return shot and take him out. Much better gun over range. Unfortunately, the rest of my team wasn't moving over this side, so I had to pull myself out of cover to come and cap this base because nobody else was, and at this point we're kind of suffering in regards to the ticket count, as you can see, and somebody needed to take C, and I was really the only person available to do it. And as you can see, the Puma is pretty nippy across the open terrain. It did not take me long to cross from that ridge line and get into the cap circle. Outside of that one guy firing shots at me, I was pretty much clear the whole way through. That's C decapped, start capping now. Now the enemy team does have a couple of aircraft up at the moment, so I am reasonably nervous. I'm listening in at the moment. I can't really afford to look up and see what's going on though, but I'm listening for bomb drops. And it looks like nobody's coming to challenge me at C at this point. So my plan is I'm going to finish off C and then I'm going to drive into the town. As I said, the Puma... Oh, and here comes the bombs. Time to leave the circle, explosion behind, and we are clear. So, as I said, the Puma is, by virtue of its four-wheel steering, actually quite nippy turning corners. So if you can get it into the towns and get it up to speed, you can nick in and out of corners very, very rapidly and put this gun to work. So my hope is to try and clear a path over and take the A cap as well. Just making sure to check my corners here, because that is probably my biggest risk. This gun's good enough to go through most of the tanks that you'll face armor-wise, but at the same time, with only 30mm of armor and even less to the sides, you can be taken out in a single hit with no problems at all, and at town fighting ranges, pretty much everything's going to pen. Unfortunately, I get to this point and somebody is already decapping my work at sea, so we have a target in there somewhere. So, nothing for it, we've got to nick back here and take out whatever is floating around at sea. Now, I was in a little bit of a rush because I assumed everything was in the cap circle, and take a hit to the left-hand side. It does some damage, thankfully not enough to take out the tank. Whatever was decapping has ran around the corner, and appears to still be doing so, but as I said, the Puma is extremely good in the corners, and it's generally faster than most of the tanks it'll find, so we should be able to come around on the flanks. Unfortunately, he guessed what we were up to, puts one into us, lights us on fire. We do exactly the same in return, pop the extinguishers so we can quickly put ours out. We've taken out his gunner in the process, just drill him with machine gun fire while we're at it to blind him using gun smoke, and execution. And unfortunately, now we're very vulnerable. We're stuck here for a little over 20 seconds while we screw our engine back together. And at this point, somebody has capped out C, so we know there is at least one more tank in this area at this time. But thankfully, the team has managed to push through and take the center cap point, so I don't need to worry about that. We just have to get C back. So 2 points in advantage. The enemy team's tickets are dropping. Engine is repaired. Now I need to be cautious here because it's likely the guy who's around here knows, and there he is right there. Rush to the corner, take a shot, bounced off the rear, line the gun up. Looking for the shot, straight through the side, and thank you very much for playing. 6th kill. Now with the central cap taken, I'm reasonably confident that we should have vehicles covering my left-hand flank, so I'm just backing it up a bit here so I can get a look down both the left and right-hand side of this building to try and keep this area cleared as I'm decapping. But we get strafed out by an aircraft, engine set on fire, we cannot move at this point in time, we're stuck, and in come the bombs, and that's it, she's all over. 1 zone captured, 6 targets killed, and 2 assists for 2,579 points. And just to top it off, the enemy team chose to compliment me. I love getting compliments in matches. So the Puma, what a fun little armoured fighting vehicle. I really enjoy driving this thing out. Now, due to a couple of its drawbacks, I don't think I would ever use it as the primary vehicle in any lineup that I put together, but it's most certainly going to be the main secondary vehicle in all of my German tank lineups from 2.7 to 3.7 and possibly even out to 4.0 from this point on. Anyways, ladies and gents, I hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you very much for watching. Remember to check me out on Patreon if you would like to help support the channel directly. And as always, click that like button, subscribe if you want to see more. Drive smart, drive safe, and I'll catch you on the battlefield.